I was good at being able to convene people around a cause, or I was good at budgeting, or I was good at these things. What I realized was my gift, my skill, was my experience as being a non-binary person living in this world. That was my gift. And I think that was sort of a key moment early in the work with Transfocus that really helped me to understand that. And the other skill sets were just my tools in the toolkit to help share that gift.
And we need to reset the conversation, essentially, realizing this is where people are stuck, and there's like a handful of topics that I could rattle off, but for another episode. And so like now we're really keying in on those and really leaning into them rather than running away from them.
This episode feels like such a special one because at the beginning of this year, Transfocus turned 10 years old, which is such an exciting milestone to have hit. Today, we are so lucky to have Transfocus co-founder Drew Dennis join Kai and I on the pod to talk about those early days, how a volunteering effort snowballed into something so much bigger, and how Transfocus grew from a chat over coffee to impacting people and organizations all over the world. Kai and Drew, I am so excited to have you both here. How are you doing?
Amazing.
Oh, doing terrific. Thank you.
So first of all, Drew, I joined Transfocus long after you stepped away. So your name has always kind of been floating around, but I've never really met you. This is the first time I've met you. So would you mind introducing yourself a little bit? I also am really curious about how you know each other. So can you include that in your intro?
Okay, yeah. Well, Elle, it's lovely to meet you. Very excited, and of course, I've been following you on emails and on social media. So great. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I started Transfocus with Kai. We co-founded the firm together. I had been working in queer and trans spaces in the city of Vancouver for probably, I'm going to date myself now, probably 20 years preceding Transfocus. Now I feel really old. Thank you, Al. and I was executive director for 15 years, for quite a long time, with Out on Screen, which produces the Vancouver Queer Film Festival. And we also developed a province-wide program focused on SOGI education called Out Schools. And, that work with Out on Screen really led to a lot of my involvement in community spaces, fostering, cultivating community spaces for 2S LGBTQ plus people in communities in Vancouver. And I'll maybe kind of leave it there in terms of my introduction. I guess I should also share that I use the pronouns they, them, their. That I became Drew in 1996 when I began my own gender journey. And at that time, I didn't use pronouns. And for the most part, that was met with relative acceptance within my community, amongst my family, amongst close friends, in workplaces, which is pretty fantastic when you think about it, to look back that far to 1996 and that people were able to manage not using pronouns. It didn't mean that there weren't slip-ups, but for the most part, there was general acceptance, even though people didn't really know much at that time. ...
That's great. And so how do you two know each other then? How did that happen?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Well, I think that's part of the story, a little bit about how Transfocus came to be and what was kind of happening in Vancouver, British Columbia before we started the firm. The city of Vancouver had struck for the first time an advisory committee that was specific to 2S LGBTQ plus communities. And I was part of that inaugural committee along with lots of many amazing people that were part of that initial group. And from that, when we were looking at, where's their barrier to people of the 2SLG, and we weren't using the full acronym at the time, I should also mention, right? This was 2009. And so I think some deeper understanding of those identities represented within the acronym were generally not as understood as others. And that really led that advisory committee to start looking at, well, okay, we're at a time where there's marriage equality. For the most part, not everybody, but for the most part, there's general acceptance of sexuality around gay and lesbian people. Right. So where are the real barriers? And it really was, I think, recognizing that there was still much to learn for people to understand what trans and gender diverse people were experiencing and those barriers, particularly in our municipal spaces. And that led to a real deep dive in parks and recreational spaces. And that's where Kai and I first met.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that correct, Kai? I think we maybe met
correct.
a little bit ahead of that, but that's where we really got to know each other.
Yeah. We're really, we're able to kind of deepen both our friendship and working relationship. Yeah. Before that was a bit with Out and Screens. I did help with some of the evaluation work. I know I like to crunch numbers and big data person. So that was always very rewarding and fulfilling to understand how those education sessions were being received. So those were kind of the early days, but of course there was somebody like an education coordinator that I was working with primarily. So yeah, where it really deepened is this advisory that was put together. And so coming from the 2S LGBTQI advisory for the whole city, looking then specifically at recreation, there was a trans, at the time we didn't say Two-Spirit, but it has now subsequently been added, and gender diverse folks. And there was about 7 of us, if I remember correctly. And myself, Drew, and another person were kind of there to kind of really help guide and shape things. I was brought in, I think, Drew, we had a coffee meeting. I think it was at Delaney's in the West End. And you're like, you've got that social science research skill set that would be really valuable. And so I was like, oh, right. Yeah. Sounds like a lot of fun and really important. And I had just come out as trans. It would maybe have been a half a year or so. And I had noticed just how many gaps there were. I mean, I was dealing a lot with healthcare, but you just kind of, anywhere you looked, I was like, holy smokes. Like, I'm sure people have tried to address this, but not a lot has moved. And so I was very motivated to be involved, to help out in any way that I could. And of course, having Drew tap my shoulder was like, very inspiring. So based on the work that you've done, Drew. So yeah, I was very excited to join.
So going from that to then Transfocus, I mean, that's quite a jump, like working together and then suddenly being like, why don't we start Transfocus? Why don't we start a business together? So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think the work of the park board. So again, what was happening in the city of Vancouver was somewhat unique. There was definitely a lot of beginning to be trans inclusion work that was happening in pockets at other municipalities, kind of across North America, Canada, US. Looking at North America alone, there was definitely a lot that was starting to happen, and definitely colleges and universities were a site of location where that work was happening as well. But I think Vancouver, particularly with what then unfolded when the Vancouver Park Board decided to strike this working group, which Kai and I were both a part of, and you're right, there was about 7 or 8 of us that were part of that group. I think it was one of the first times that a municipality was really looking at it in such a holistic way and in a comprehensive way. So I think in other municipalities, there might have been a champion, in the social services area of a city, but it was city council and park board. There was elected officials, kind of unanimous support that was really opening up and demonstrating leadership to learn more and to kind of do better. And so that, I think, was such a unique opportunity for us. I know I really felt the responsibility, and I think we all did on the working group, of how do we best leverage this moment, leverage this window of leadership opportunity and ways that served our community that we could really, kind of deliver some impact. And from that, we did some community consultation. None of it was perfect, but we really delved into about a year of community consultation on various levels. We spent time going into aquatic centers in particular. Swimming pools are a real source of tension and barriers for, just the vulnerability. You can't access a pool without going through a change room, and those change rooms tend to be historically have tended to be gendered spaces. So
for sure,
we spent time surveying people in change rooms. We spent so much time in aquatic centers. But that work then led to a set of 77 recommendations. And the park board meeting which is a public meeting, when those recommendations in the report was delivered, and there was members of the committee, including Kai, and the public who had an opportunity to speak directly to park board commissioners. And it was a standing room only. It was packed. The room was packed. And I remember when the vote was called, you couldn't hear a pin drop. Like, each of the commissioners kind of around the table took a moment to speak to the report and, preface their vote. And it was a unanimous vote, and the whole room erupted with applause. There was a standing ovation, including the commissioners gave the community a standing ovation. It was just a really powerful moment. And I think for many of us as trans people, we hadn't felt that level of support before.
Right, I can imagine.
So it was kind of a really momentous occasion. And from there, the report got a lot of attention. And then suddenly, members of the working group were being asked to go and speak at conferences, to speak to other municipalities. And that was really where Kai and I had a lot of those opportunities, along with other folks on the working group. And that really, I think, led to seeing that there was actually demand and interest. There were organizations that were wanting to have more information. And I think we really learned a lot through that community consultation process and felt that we had something to offer in their learnings.
It's so true. I just wanted to echo a few things. It's kind of amazing, one, the support that you described, Drew, from political leadership, especially across the spectrum, right? So that was really powerful, and for the community to witness that. So it was very exciting times. And of course, the media was also all over this report, because, from local TV all the way across nationally. And so, various members of the committee were, doing these interviews. And of course, that spreads the word. There's both excitement and like, oh, we need this in our community, but also a bit of like question marks and, kind of trying to get clarification. So you can kind of start to see early rumblings, even at that time. But most of it was really positive and a desire to understand further. And so there was a lot of calls for us to present at conferences or, talk to other municipalities. One thing I do want to clarify is that this whole year-long effort was purely voluntary for the whole committee, right? This is Drew's time, my time, all the other committee members, significant amount of time that we gave to this, right? And of course, we did it full-heartedly too, right? Because we wanted to take care of our fellow trans and non-binary and two-spirit siblings in the city, as well as, help with understanding more generally. Now, that said, volunteering going forward was not like very much a sustainable model. And that's where the idea of having a consulting practice was born, where there would be incoming requests, which there were, and then to be able to respond to those in a more sustainable manner, to be able to equip companies or organizations to understand their needs and then to deliver. So that's where the kind of consulting approach came from, is, the kind of a lot of response to that, and then trying to figure out a model that would help with that, responding to it.
What would you say kind of surprised you about the early stages? Because I'm imagining now, and this is all assumptions, so forgive me if this is not true, but I'm imagining that there really wasn't a lot of understanding in the way that maybe there is now. The kind of idea of trans and non-binary people generally have at the very least heard of trans and non-binary people, and I'm imagining that, not to say that wasn't the case then, but I imagine that there was a lot less of that back when you first started. So were there any kind of surprising things about the kind of early stages of that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly people that were coming to us, I mean, we didn't do a lot of advertising. We just put something on Facebook and are like, we're open for business. And so that was kind of the official kickoff. And of course, we shared within our network more generally, or more specifically as well. But essentially, a lot of the requests were just, what is this all about? It certainly helped that we had the report from the Vancouver Park Board to be able to be like, oh, I'd never considered forms, or yeah, I maybe understood generally what washrooms might be a cause for
Right.
concern. But I haven't thought about how to train, staff or, financial accessibility. So it just helped highlight, a few areas that perhaps organizations hadn't considered, and or trans and non-binary folks didn't feel safe to come forward to even talk about, because you have to kind of out yourself to talk about the issues. And so it just kind of shed a light for folks to be like, oh, we need to tackle this preemptively or sometimes reactively. A lot of that early period, there was a lot of trans and non-binary folks coming out at work. And so there was that impetus to be like, ooh, we need to properly include and incorporate these employees, and they might have specific needs that we need to address. So that was really helpful and valuable. That you're right, there wasn't much of an understanding. And so it's really just kind of setting the stage and giving options for organizations to proceed.
Absolutely, Kai. I think that's true. There was less understanding, so necessarily education had to be embedded in everything that we were doing.
Right.
At that time with early clients. That was just sort of the reality of where we were. But there was another. Not only was there a lot of progressive work that was happening in the city of Vancouver, there was another really important thing that was happening at that time, and you're right, we hung our shingle with literally, I think it was a post on Facebook and LinkedIn. It was, here we are. And within 2 weeks of that, gender identity and gender expression became encoded within our Canadian Charter rights. And we knew that was happening. So, in real estate, it's location, location, location. I think for us, for TransFocus, it was very much about timing. Timing was key. And suddenly, particularly those, our phone, our phone was ringing off the hook. We really didn't have to do a lot of advertising or pushing our offerings on organizations. There was a lot of calls that was coming to us, and a lot of that was HR professionals, like wondering how to be compliant. Or there was, as Kai said, more and more trans and gender nonconforming people were coming out in the workplace, and suddenly HR professionals were, how do I deal with this? What do I do? Panicking but smart enough to realize that they needed help, right? Like I think that was a turning point, that people were at a place where they recognized this was something that, rather than force people down or force people into, the kind of square peg into a round hole, that people were realizing they needed in their own role, they needed some support to support that employee and others in the workplace. So that really, I think a lot of some of those early client calls were for kind of a little bit of basic education and supporting employee transitions that sometimes kind of initiated work that generated other work in other areas within the organization.
Given the timing of all of that then, and obviously having just come off the back of this, was it a year long, you said, volunteering? Was that right? So coming off the back of that, how did you then figure out what work you would be offering? Because you could be going in so many different directions here. And I guess it's with this kind of new update to the law, and there's just a lot. So how did you figure out what that would look like, what you wanted to focus on? I'm just guessing that, I'm imagining there was a lot of learning on the go.
Oh, 100%. 100% learning on the go. The park board, the work from the park board and those recommendations, the recommendations were kind of set across 5 key areas, and we use those 5 key areas. I think we tweaked them a little bit, because I think we even learned in the consultation process with the park board that we didn't quite get them right, maybe. So we tweaked those, and that was, I know that it's different now what you're doing, but that was sort of the initial. It did give us a bit of a template of where to begin. But I think one of the things, Kai, that I really appreciated about those early days, I mean, I had just come out of a really long time, like tenure with an organization. There was something that was so freeing, because I think we both really connected. We had similar values, similar work ethics, and we really connected and just said, let's be curious, let's be open and give ourselves permission to try different things, to see what works, to be continuously reflective, and recognize, I think Kai used to say all the time, we're building the plane mid-flight. Like, and there was, but that for me was so freeing, right? To be able to say, okay, we're going to let go of perfectionism. We're going to do the best that we can, obviously. But that, I think, just really gave us room to be curious, to explore, to kind of lean into different things, to try different tactics and approaches, to see what was landing, what was resonating for other people. As we kind of, and we definitely used journey language at that time. Like we're all on a journey, and we're on a journey together, right? So how do we meet each other in that journey wherever we are?
Yeah, that's so true. It's so interesting to think back at those early stages and, having a bit of a framework, but needing to continuously adapt it. And so having to be flexible in that regard, and how that's, that really served us. And we were very responsive to what we were hearing from clients. If things didn't quite work the way we had set them up, of course we did change them, right? There's many different sectors and industries that we're handling, whether, hosteling, municipalities, finance, all these are very different industries with different types of needs. And so just really listening, while also giving, best practices, or at that point was just emerging practices, really. And really kind of trying to fine tune those to the organizations. And I think that kind of a posture really helped with clients, because they were understandably nervous to begin with. But then once they kind of saw our approach, they could kind of like just relax a little bit and be like, we're going to figure this out together. And not everybody has the kind of corner on the answer or answers, but we're going to find it together. And I think that really was quite powerful, because then we could create something that was really meaningful and also actionable. Like, we don't want to just create something for our own health, right? Like, we want it to live outside on its own. And I think we were really able to achieve that quite well in the early days.
That's so interesting, that kind of theme, well, at least from my perspective working for Transfocus now, is that people still come with the nerves of like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do. This thing has happened. A lot of the time, maybe it's a bit reactive, having something happened at work, or maybe it's that they know that they're missing something and they really want to figure it out. And it comes with a lot of nerves. And then you really do chill people out a bit. And it's very much about the journey and the process. And that seems to maybe not have changed so much then.
Yeah. It still continues to this day to have a flexible and adaptive approach. I would say even in the last year or so, that has really served us quite well, is to be attuned and listening, because things are shifting quite drastically. So I don't know if that will ever really go away. And I think that was a valuable beginning and has served ongoingly as well.
One of the questions I have is about the evolution of Transfocus, because where you started and where we are now, politically, socially, everything's changed. And I'm not going to ask you to dive in to the politics of that, but just in general, things have shifted. People have maybe are understanding more, but then with that, maybe more visibility has come, a bit more scrutiny, perhaps. And so I'm curious about what that evolution has felt like.
Well, maybe I'll say, from the outside. Well, just as a person, I started introducing myself as somebody who really understood and celebrated myself as somebody who's non-binary, came to my own understanding that I was non-binary. And I wasn't using non-binary. The term I was using, I think at the time, was genderqueer in 1996. And that was that's when I became Drew and didn't use pronouns. And there was a time then where, people that were close in my circle, Kai and I would often talk about this, particularly with other trans people, if we were supporting an employee, for instance, who was transitioning the workplace. Like, you can't have everybody understand you. Like, it would be too time consuming, and too much energy would go into that. But the important that are people in that bullseye who are close to you, it's important, right, to have that. And So I think that was a time when there was so much explanation and personal explanation and almost demands for people to, they needed to understand, or I needed to delve a lot of personal information for them to understand.
Mm.
And it was really nice, even in my time with Transfocus in those first 3 years, to see that shift within 3 years, to see that shift when we were doing employee transition. And we'd go in and do a session with maybe colleagues that were part of that transitioning employees department. And we'd ask the question, okay, this person's going to come in. What do you need to know about them? And they said, oh, I need to know their name and what pronoun they're using. Like they got there. They got even then that they didn't need all the backstory
Right.
of or the and so that to say that, I think that is a piece that's really shifted that I've noticed in my own lived experience navigating the world. That has really shifted. It's in many ways, I have the privilege of saying in some ways it's a non-issue. Do I get misgendered? Yes. Not constantly, but still, yes, that happens regularly. And, that's tiresome. I wish it didn't happen. But at the very least now, people understand about pronouns. They understand
Right.
what non-binary trans, most people do. They have some
Yeah.
general touch point that they can point to. And more, particularly people with children in their lives or part of their, whether it's part of their church community, part of their school community, part of their whatever kind of community they're part of, if there's kids, then they know trans people because I think that's what I see. It happens a lot within parents where
Right.
it's becoming more and more common, or even grandparents for that matter.
Mm.
But that said, and this has always happened. I think it's happened with, and when you look at social justice movements, when you look at human rights movements, there's always progression, and then there will be forces pushing back against that progression. And I think we're at that time now. A group that I'm involved with here in my local community, I'm no longer living in Vancouver, but we just presented a film with the United Church in our community, and it's a film called Mama Bears, coming out of the U.S. And it's parents of faith communities who are advocating for their trans or queer kids. And watching that film, which was recent, that film was just made in the last 3 or 4 years, and seeing the impact of trans youth, some of the kids that in Texas who are suddenly being outed, right? Who are being forced to use the bathroom that is not the right bathroom for them. Like, so we're in this constant, like, yes, it's getting better, but there's always, I think the message, I think for many of us is we always have to continue that work, continue to show up, continue to have conversations. And I think I have a lot of faith and optimism that despite sometimes the noise and what's happening on the political stage, there is always organizations and people that are just quietly, steadfastly doing the work of inclusion. And, and that's thanks to Kai and Elle and your team at Transfocus, that you're there as a resource for those organizations wanting to really continue to support their trans and gender inclusion efforts.
So true. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so important to kind of remember kind of where we've come from, what's happened, and where we're headed. And certainly it's interesting from my perspective as Transfocus has evolved. I mean, I have my own personal stories around it in terms of how I've observed it personally, but I actually saw a lot of this, interestingly enough, in survey data well before it kind of hit the news, which was interesting. It was like almost a canary in the mine situation where I was like, where is all this like kind of vitriol coming from? People, when they're speaking anonymously, can sometimes be more forthcoming than in other platforms. And I just saw people really struggling with gender diversity. And at Transfocus, we survey trans and cis folk because we want to understand what's happening in the hearts and minds of cisgender folks as well. Understand when they're struggling and also understand what their needs are to better support trans and non-binary folks. But there was one survey in particular where we had hundreds of responses, and I was just reading through these and just like I was really struck by how harsh and in some cases hateful they were, and it really jarred me. And then in a few, like a year or so down the road, that's when you saw it more in the news and on social media. And so it kind of hit before it splashed over into the public domain. And I didn't know what to do with it except continue the work that we're doing, and certainly have continued resolve to support in any way that we can. But it was disconcerting to see that kind of pop up and then, now be out there. Now that said, I think it's important to kind of, as a moment of like realization, we need to reset the conversation, essentially, realizing this is where people are stuck, and there's like a handful of topics that I could rattle off, but for another episode. And so like now we're really keying in on those and really leaning into them rather than running away from them. And I think that's really important. And that's a kind of a bit of a shift, although not necessarily that big, because of course we have a very solid foundation that we have established over 10 years. But I would say that's the thing where it's like, okay, this is a concern, and we can figure it out together. Maybe not everybody, but the majority of folks for sure. And so that's where I would kind of, broadly speaking, the evolution has kind of brought us.
I'm really curious because you've both spoken about this learning on the fly and having a lot of openness and curiosity and just sort of taking things as they come and working with what you have. And I find that so fascinating because it must have a level of it must be a bit scary as well. Maybe that's just me projecting because I'm a nervous Nancy, but just sort of walking into a space and not necessarily knowing what you're going to get until you're there. And I'm really fascinated to know how this has shaped you as individuals and how working for Transfocus and looking at this work, how that's changed you, if it has changed you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think, it changed me. It was, I think one of the things, I had this aha moment. I remember sharing with you early on, Kai, like probably within our first year. And, I had mentioned I'd spent all these years working in queer and trans spaces. But I really shied away from bringing my own lived experience to that work. And I think often because I was working for an organization, I felt like I had to uphold the voice of the organization. It wasn't about Drew Dennis, it was about community. Right. And I think in that early work with Transfocus, first of all, it was uncomfortable as all heck at times because suddenly I had to bring that part of me into the work, right? I had to get more comfortable sharing some of those stories that I loathed having to share with people early on. But finding ways that I could do that felt like I was divulging the right amount of information, right? What was really helpful, and finding my comfort and confidence in doing that. But through that process, I had thought my skills were, I was good at being able to convene people around a cause, or I was good at budgeting, or I was good at these things. What I realized was my gift, my skill, was my experience as being a non-binary person living in this world. That was my gift. And I think that was sort of a key moment early in the work with Transfocus that really helped me to understand that. And the other skill sets were just my tools in the toolkit to help share that gift with others. And I think that for me was a really powerful moment. And I think something that was really a key change point, I think, in my life and how I show up in the world.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful.
Wonderful. Yeah,
I'm tearing up.
I'm going to cry now. Jeez.
We got tissues. So we get them quickly. But yeah, it's so important because even in the early days, like a lot of folks could understand trans men and women to some extent. I mean, somewhat limited, but still. They could wrap their head around the binary, but where people really struggled and continue to do so, unfortunately, is the people beyond the binary. And so really wanting to understand. And so the gift of, there's a giving of the gift of your experience that you drew that really kind of unlocked things for so many people. I got to witness kind of frontline, whether we were co-facilitating or meeting a client for the first time, where they're just like, deer in headlights, kind of scared, and then realizing, oh, okay, this is way more easy than I thought, and I can actually do this, right? Like, be respectful of pronouns, or whatever the kind of practical is, and could see humanity, right? Because that's often missing in a lot of these conversations, is like, we're talking about humans, all of us here in this virtual room and beyond. And so that's so important for people to remain anchored in the humanity of trans, non-binary, and two-spirit experiences. And so I'm just, and it's interesting because I also struggled with sharing my own story at the beginning, and found a few pieces that I felt comfortable. Some pieces are just for ourselves or people who are close to us, but there are pieces we can share more broadly. And to your point, Elle, about kind of feeling kind of out of, it's kind of a bit scary to be in this more open, trying to figure it out as you go posture. But it's interesting because growing up, I had a lot of uncertainty. I grew up in many different countries. And kind of moved every year of my life on average for the first 30 or so years. And so I'm familiar with not knowing and trying to figure things out on the fly. And so just kind of leveraging that to be like, this is not just another example of that, and being able to, work with people to come to that understanding. So, and I think people really value that because, they do want people to know what's recommended or what to do. But they also realize that they need to be a part of the co-creative process as well, or they realize that kind of midway through sometimes too. So yeah, it's really cool that way. But yeah, so there's some of the reflections.
That's really cool. I really love that. And so true. I didn't think about that, how your moving around probably led you to be very well equipped for this. Kai is the calmest person I've ever met in my life. As somebody who is outrageously anxious over nothing, Kai is like the most chill. I feel like you're permanently on a sofa just chilling. It's a really cool thing to be around. So that makes sense. I guess to wrap up then, the last question I have for you, and of course you can always share more if you have other things you want to say, but the last question I have is, now that TransFocus is 10 years old, what are you most proud of? When you look back at the whole thing, what would you say are your top things that you're proud of?
Maybe I'll start, Kai, because I think this is really important for you. I think being that you've so wonderfully continued TransFocus to this day, and I'm just so grateful to you for that work that you're doing, and proud for what you've accomplished as well. But I think for me, and thank you for the invitation to join me on this podcast, because it really was this opportunity to kind of think back to those early days. And I think there's so many moments and things to be proud of or excited about, or, grateful for those opportunities. But I think I'm most proud of that we took the plunge, that we did it.
Yep.
That we took that leap of faith. And that moment, by the way, Elle, happened sitting on a couch with Kai, and he was very calm and chill.
So chill, so relaxed.
And I remember being really nervous to ask Kai, like, do you think this is something we could do? So I'm just really proud that we took the plunge, and so grateful and proud for you that you're continuing it, that you and Elle and the TransFocus team are still going strong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot, because I think I agree with you 100% that just going for it is, you can try to be like, is this the right time? You can kind of second guess oneself. And, do we have the proper tools, and, are we the people to do, on and on and on. But it was like this real pivotal moment in both of our careers. I mean, you talked about yours, Drew. I was just kind of reading the tea leaves within the mining work that I was doing, and becoming increasingly uncomfortable with, working with Indigenous groups and with mining companies. There was a bit of a tension there, and then realizing there was this huge other opportunity with the trans inclusion work, where I can speak directly from lived experience, along with other lived across the spectrum of gender identities. And so I was like, oh, this is amazing. And we had just done all this work. So it wasn't kind of free floating, so there was an anchor point. And so I'm also really proud that we just did it. And also that we did it with like humor and not just this flexibility and openness, but like we could have fun with it too, right? Like we took trips, like we went to DC and we went to, parts of California and throughout BC, and and we're just able to look at things on the ground and be able to talk to folks, whether it's, washrooms or policy or whatnot, and really get a good sense of what's happening so that we could be very thoughtful in what we suggested or how we provided education or whatever the service we were delivering. And those early connections with, very thoughtful, very passionate leaders just really was like filled my cup tremendously. And of course it was fun to travel with you, Drew, to have those experiences and just be like, there's kind of this world of possibility that felt very kind of poignant, and like we knew we were kind of on the precipice of something big, and we just didn't quite have a picture yet, but we're part of it along with so many others, obviously. But yeah, it was a really kind of very special, magical moment that will forever be in my heart. And of course, it continues. The magic is always there, but something about, especially the work we had already done, Drew, and myself as part of the committee, that just really helped create a confident launching point. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts that I have.
Yeah, and there were so many moments too. You're right. We were traveling, we were visiting different areas, we were doing work with clients in the US at the time. And I think what stands out, what matters most in those early days were those moments where we, often we were cis facing, right? We were working with, whether it was a whole organization, part of an organization, the leadership team. So often that work was with cis people of an organization. But I think the moments that really mattered and that really stand out for me to this day is when those opportunities where we were working directly with trans and two-spirit and non-binary people, and that we had those opportunities to kind of see, to really learn what mattered for people, how people were being impacted in workplaces, how that helped inform the work that we were doing. But also those opportunities when you could see the relief of a person who then suddenly was being supported in the workplace. You could see the hope that they had, that they could actually manage this, that they would get the support that they needed in the workplaces. And I think that was the reason to kind of get up in the morning and keep going for me. And I'm so glad that continues to happen, right? That TransFocus is continuing to have that opportunity of impact for so many people.
Oh my goodness, that's so lovely. What a note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, Drew. And thank you both of you for talking over this. The last 10 years of TransFocus is so exciting. And I am personally delighted to be working for TransFocus, but it's just really exciting to see the impact that it had at the beginning and that it's continuing to have now. So I'm so grateful to both of you for taking that leap too.
Yeah, it was lovely to talk to you all.
Yeah, lovely to have a conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye for now.